Hey everyone, before we start the deck tech today, I'd like to say remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it, put a comment down in the comment section down below, all that stuff. But the thing I wanted to say is we're almost at 300 subscribers already, and that's awesome. I've already gotten to this point a few months into my YouTube quote-unquote career. And yeah, the fact that I'm growing this fast is just awesome, and your guys' support is just amazing. It's boosted my self-confidence, and it's just made me want to keep making great content for all of you. So again, thank you very much for all of your overwhelming support for me, and let's go ahead and get into the deck tech. Hey everyone, how's it going? So I figured, since on my last video I went over the Tiny Leaders format, I figured that we'd go over one of my Tiny Leader decks today. If you haven't seen that Tiny Leaders video, I'm going to put a link in the description, probably in the video, and then you can go check it out there. It's kind of like a little mini documentary explaining the history of the format and so on. So the deck we're going to be looking at today is Animar Soul of Elements. Now, this isn't your usual Animar deck where you're abusing his abilities to get huge hydras or powerful creatures out on the field. Instead, we're actually going to be using his last ability, and we're going to be exploiting that. So Animar is green, red, and blue for a 1/1 legendary elemental that has protection from white and black. And whenever we cast a creature spell, we put a +1/+1 counter on Animar Soul of Elements. And then his last ability, the one that we want to be using, the one that's relevant to us, is creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on Animar. So what is it that we're going to be doing exactly? Well, there's this artifact from Ravnica called Cloudstone Curio. So Cloudstone Curio is a 3-mana artifact that says, whenever a non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So essentially we're going to be bouncing creatures, and since Animar makes creatures cheaper each time we cast it, we're going to be using very cheap and very mana efficient creatures, and effectively we're going to be netting infinite mana to do some really janky stuff with the deck. Beyond getting infinite mana, in some cases we're also going to be pretty much using the whole creatures entering the battlefield effect as kind of like a storm counter almost, and I'll explain why in the deck later. So the creatures that we're going to be using in conjunction with Cloudstone Curio and Animar we're going to start with our 0-drop creatures. So our 0-drop creatures are the 3 kobolds from Legends. So they're all the same. They're 0 mana red 0/1s that all have this kobold creature type. And we're effectively just playing them to abuse it with Cloudstone Curio. If we get one on the field and we play another, we can return the first one back to our hand, and we can keep on repeating this, and then we can get our storm count to go off essentially. And this is pretty much the easiest way to get the combo online. And while this doesn't net us infinite mana, we do have other creatures that do that same thing for us, but this is pretty much the easiest way to get the combo to get going. So our infinite mana engines are both Cloud of Fairies and Priest of Urabrask. So Cloud of Fairies is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 flyer that's a fairy, and it says whenever Cloud of Fairies comes into play, we untap up to 2 lands. It also has that cycling ability. It's not really super relevant, but hey, we'll take a card draw whenever we can. But with Animar, so we cast a creature and we put a +1/+1 counter on Animar, right? So that means if we want to cast Cloud of Fairies, it'll only cost that blue mana. So if we can tap 2 lands, cast Cloud of Fairies, then use its ability to untap those 2 lands and find a way to bounce it back with like a Kobolds or a Priest of Urabrask, we can effectively use that to keep untapping and tapping a single land and gain mana that way. And the same is true for Priest of Urabrask, except when it enters the battlefield, it doesn't untap lands. Instead, it adds triple red to our mana pool. So Priest of Urabrask, 2 and a red for a 2/1 human cleric, and yeah, when it enters the battlefield, we get a red dark ritual. So we'll also be bouncing this, and we'll be netting mana each time we do that. So those are our infinite mana engines, and what we're going to be using that mana for is cards like Stroke of Genius. So Stroke of Genius is X 2 and a blue for an instant that says target player draws X cards. Now we could target ourselves and draw a bunch of cards, but if we're going to be netting infinite mana, we're going to make our opponent draw all of it, so that way they just lose right there on the spot. And the second card that we're going to be using with the infinite mana on is Banefire. So Banefire is X in a red for a sorcery, and we pay X into it and it deals X damage to target creature or player. But if we pay more than 5, it can't be countered by spells and abilities, and the damage can't be prevented. So yeah, we want to be getting up to above lethal and then shoot our opponent in the face, and they pretty much can't interact with it. So yeah, this is another good win con for the combo, especially if we can get infinite mana. If we can't, then we have other ways of winning, and those other ways are our storm payoff cards essentially. So we're going to be going over the first cards. They aren't storm technically, but they act like storm. So the first card is Altar of the Brood. Altar of the Brood is a 1-mana artifact from Khans of Tarkir that states, whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So each time we bounce a creature, we just mill our opponent 1 card, and we just keep repeating this over and over again, preferably in 1 turn. So by the time we pass back to our opponent, they lose right there on the spot. The other permanent that works with this combo is Impact Tremors. So Impact Tremors is 1 in a red for an enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's effectively the same as Altar of the Brood, but instead of milling, we're shooting our opponents in the face. So our 2 storm payoff cards are Grape Shot and Brain Freeze. So Grape Shot is 1 in a red, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player with Storm. And for those of you that don't know what Storm is, essentially is that whenever we cast Grape Shot or Brain Freeze, the spell copies itself for each spell we cast before it. So if we bounced our kobolds or our other creatures 30 times, for example, then we cast Grape Shot. Grape Shot copies itself 30 times, and then effectively we get 31 Grape Shots. And the same is true with Brain Freeze. So Brain Freeze is 1 in a blue, and target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So effectively, Brain Freeze is the same as Grape Shot, except where Grape Shot can just kill them on the spot, Brain Freeze will just mill their entire library away, and then we just pass the turn back to them. And our last win con card is Fling. So Fling is 1 in a red for an instant, but as an additional cost to cast it, we have to sacrifice a creature. But Fling deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. So the only creature that we want to be sacrificing to this is Animar. So we get Animar in the field, we bounce our creatures, I don't know, let's say 30 times again, and then we cast Fling and sacrifice Animar, and then Fling will deal 30 damage to target creature or player. And obviously we don't want to be hitting a creature, we want to hit the player. So yeah, that's pretty much our suite of win con cards. So let's go ahead and get into the tutors to help us find these pieces. So the first of our tutors is Fabricate, and Fabricate is 2 in a blue sorcery. We may search our library for an artifact card, put it into our hand, and then shuffle our library. So our most important card in this deck besides Animar is Cloudstone Curio, obviously. So we want to be finding have as many cards as possible that can go find it, and have other cards in our deck that can go and get it back from the graveyard if our opponents deal with it, because, well, let's face it, more than likely they'll find a way to deal with it, because this is a combo deck that is very, very fragile. I will admit that this deck is, while it's not perfect, it works very well, but it's kind of glass cannon-ish. If we can't get the right stuff online, this deck just falls apart. So we have to make sure that we get Cloudstone Curio online. So that's why we have stuff like Fabricate, and we also play Drift of Phantasms. So Drift of Phantasms is 2 in a blue for a creature spirit from Ravnica. That's an 0/5 with Defender and Flying. But the key part of this card is Transmute. So Transmute is we discard a card and then we search our library for a card with the same CMC as the said card. So since Drift of Phantasms costs 3 and we can transmute it, that means we can go find our Cloudstone Curio with it. And our other tutors are transmute cards. So the first one is Muddle the Mixture. Muddle the Mixture is double blue for an instant that counters target instant or sorcery spell, and we can transmute it. So whatever we want to be finding with it is cards like Cloud of Fairies, Brain Freeze, Grape Shot, Fling, stuff like that. Maybe we need to find something else that can help us get our combo back online, like Den Protector or Regrowth, or Impact Tremors is another combo piece we can go find. But yeah, this is a really good tutor for the deck because it can find not just combo pieces, but like utility spells in general. And our final transmute card is Teleria West. So Teleria West is a land, and we can go transmute it to go find other 0-drop cards. So we can go find any other land that we need to go find, like Academy Ruins or something like that, or Command Tower if we need to get our mana online. But the other thing we can go grab is our Kobolds cards, because our Kobolds each cost 0 mana. So we can go find the Kobolds with our Teleria West card, and then we can just get our combo online that way as well. So how are we going to be finding this combo? I mean, it is a 50 card deck, so it won't be too hard to find what we need, but we do need to be able to find that. So first off, we're going to be playing Wall of Blossoms. So Wall of Blossoms is 1 and a green for an 0/4 with Defender, and when it enters the battlefield, we draw a card. So effectively, we can use this to bounce over and over again to draw through our entire library, or early in the game, we just play it and it's an 0/4 body on the ground that can block some early attackers and keep us alive throughout the game. So while I was thinking of playing Elvish Visionary, Wall of Blossoms is just better because it has that big butt. Even though it can't attack, it can like save us from dying, so that's very important. The next card is Sylvan Library. So Sylvan Library is 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, pay 4 life or put the card on top of your library. So this card is kind of confusing for people that don't really understand what this card does. So Sylvan Library essentially says, at the beginning of our draw step, we can draw 2 additional cards, as the card states. But for each card that we choose, we take 4 life. So if we take both of those cards, we lose 8 life. If we take one of those, we lose 4 life. If we don't draw any cards, we don't lose any life. And our other draw enchantment spell is Rhystic Study. So Rhystic Study is 2 and a blue, and whenever an opponent plays a spell, we may draw a card unless that player pays 1. So this has to be one of the most annoying cards ever printed, and it's really great whenever our opponent plays something and they don't catch that they paid an additional 1 and we get to draw a card. That's just pure value, and it also annoys them. So, you know, that's one of my more favorite things to do in Magic, so, you know, that gets a 100% positive. I can't understand what I'm trying to say right now, so let's just move on to the next card. So we're going to be going to our cantrips next. So our cantrips are effectively cards that replace themselves. So the first one is Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting is a red sorcery, draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, and it has that flashback of 2 and a red. This card is just super solid. We get more cards out of it than what we paid into it, and having flashback is just really awesome. The next card is Gitaxian Probe. Gitaxian Probe is a blue Phyrexian, and what that means is we can pay 2 life instead of paying a single blue mana to cast a spell. And then we look at our target player's hand and draw a card. So we want to be using this. We can use this as a cantrip early in the game if we want to, but how we want to play this card is we just hold on to it until we're ready to combo off, and then we cast this first to make sure that the path is clear and that we can in the first place. Next, we have Ponder. Ponder is a single blue sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order, and we may shuffle our library, and then we draw a card. So that first part, you know, if we look at the top 3, find 3 cards that aren't relevant at all. Let's just say that they're 3 lands, for example. We can just get rid of those and then draw into another cantrip or whatever. Or, knowing our luck, we might just draw into another land. So for these next 2, we have Preordain and Serum Visions. They're effectively kind of the same card, but not really. They have the same words on them, but they're ordered in a different way. And Preordain states that we scry first before we draw, and then Serum Vision says that we draw first and then scry. So Preordain is much better than Serum Visions because we get to look at stuff first before we draw, whereas Serum Visions we're just blindly drawing and then we get to look at 2 cards, but both effectively get to look at 3 cards. Serum Vision's more than Preordain because Preordain we might find the card that we need within the first 2 and then draw that, but effectively they both look at 3 cards and help us get our combo online. Our next card is Manamorphose. Manamorphose is 1 and a hybrid red-green for an instant, and when we cast it, we add 2 mana of any combination of colors into our mana pool, and then we draw cards. So effectively, this is a free card that draws us a card. And for the last of our cantrips, we have Explore. Explore is 1 in a green sorcery. We may play an additional land this turn and then draw a card. So, you know, if we draw into an additional land, boom, we just get to play it right there, and then it's not a dead card that we have to wait until next turn to play it. So this card is super solid. I wish we could just play a million of these in the deck, because this might be my most favorite cantrip, because having extra lands on the battlefield while drawing into a bunch of stuff to cast a bunch of stuff over and over again is great. So I love Explore. Explore is great. Buy a million Explorers, buy 30 foil Explorers right now. And the last 5 cards of our deck are utility cards. So 3 out of the 5 can get stuff back out of our graveyard, but mostly these cards don't necessarily interact with the combo in general, but they help get it online without actually getting it online themselves. And let me explain. So first we're going to start off with Eternal Witness. So Eternal Witness is 1 in double green for a 2/1, and when it enters the battlefield, we return a card from our graveyard back to our hand. So we can go get combo stuff that they might have destroyed and get it back to our hand, like our Altar of the Brood or our Cloudstone Curio or one of our creatures that we may need to get our combo online, and so forth. And the next card is Regrowth. So Regrowth is pretty much the same thing as Eternal Witness, except it's not a creature. And for the last of our Regrowth type effects, we have Den Protector. Den Protector is 1 in a green for a 2/1 human, and creatures with power less than Den Protector's power can't block it, and it has Megamorph. So for those that don't know what Morph is, we pay 3 mana to play Den Protector face down. And it's a 2/2 creature while it's face down. And we can pay 1 in a green to flip it face up. And when we flip it face up, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it thanks to Megamorph. So when it flips, it becomes a 3/2. So whenever Den Protector is turned face up, we return target card from our graveyard to our hand. So it's another Eternal Witness or Regrowth type effect, except it gets a 3/2 power body that can run over small stuff that can't block it. And for the last of our utility cards, we have Exploration. So Exploration is a single green mana enchantment that states we may play an additional land on each of our turns. And this card is pretty decent. I mean, in EDH, like, this is a card that you want early in the game, but in a deck like this, we don't care when we draw it, because we have a bunch of cantrips in the deck. So we will be drawing into more lands that we want to, and a card like Exploration will help us get those onto the battlefield, so that way we can cast more spells in a single turn. And last but not least, we have Elixir of Immortality. So Elixir is a 1 mana artifact that has an activated ability of 2 and sacrifice it. We gain 5 life, and then we shuffle Elixir of Immortality and our graveyard into our library. So if we're in a really bad spot and our opponent just completely wipes our board away, or if we're about to deck ourselves, we can play Elixir of Immortality, crack it, and put ourselves back into the game. Next we have our tri-land. So the first we have is Command Tower. We tap it to add mana of any color of our commander's identity, so either red, green, or blue. Next we have City of Brass. City of Brass, whenever we tap it at all for any reason, it deals 1 damage to us, and then we can add a mana of any color to our mana pool. And then we have Mana Confluence, which is kind of the same as City of Brass, except we tap it and then pay a life as part of the cost, and then we add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And for the last of our tri-lands, we have Frontier Bivouac. So it just enters the battlefield tapped, and then we can add green, blue, or red to our mana pool. Starting off with our duels, we have the 3 temples. So what these temples do is they enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever they enter the battlefield, we scry 1. So Temple of Abandon is the red-green one, Temple of Epiphany is the red-blue one, and Temple of Mystery is the green-blue one. As far as basics are concerned, we're running 3 mountains, 3 forests, and 2 islands. And for both of our non-basic lands, we have Academy Ruins, which Academy Ruins is a legendary land that taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay any mana or a blue into it, and we get to put an artifact from our graveyard back on top of our library. So ideally, we're wanting to be getting something like Cloudstone Curio or Altar of the Brood, or I mean, we could even grab Elixir of Immortality if we wanted to, if they found a way to blow it up. And it's just a good overall utility land to be running in the deck anyways. Next, we have Gyre Reach Sanitarium. So Gyre Reach Sanitarium is a legendary land. We tap it to add a colorless to our mana pool. Or we can pay 2 mana to tap it, and each player draws a card, then discards a card. So this land loots, and even though our opponents get to draw a card, that's not really an issue because we want to be finding our combo pieces first before our opponent has a chance to kill us. Moving on into our sideboard, we're going to be starting off with our graveyard hate first. So we have Tormod's Crypt, which is a 0 mana artifact. We can sacrifice it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. And then we have Relic of Progenitus. So Relic of Progenitus is a 1 mana artifact. We can tap it and target player exiles a card from his or her graveyard. Or we can pay 1 and exile Relic of Progenitus and then exile all cards from all graveyards and then draw a card. So we bring these in against more graveyard centric decks, or decks that have something going on with the graveyard to effectively just win the game out of the spot, or like some sort of dredge engine or something like that, just having cards to clear graveyards out of the way so we don't have to deal with a strategy that's not necessarily interacting with us. Next we have Counterflux. Counterflux is double blue and red, and it can't be countered by spells or abilities, and then we counter target spell we don't control. Plus it has its overload cost. So overload is we may change the text of target with each. So let's say our opponent is storming off, kind of like we are. We cast this spell and we cast it for its overload cost, and then we just counter each of those storm copies essentially. Let's say they cast Grape Shot for 40, and then we cast this in response with overload, and it counters all 41 copies of Grape Shot as opposed to just the first Grape Shot. Next, let's move into the artifact / enchantment hate. First, we have Nature's Claim. Nature's Claim is a single green instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and its controller gains 4 life. Next card we have is Fade into Antiquity. Fade into Antiquity is 2 and a green for a sorcery where we exile target artifact or enchantment. So this card is really good against the god cards like Farika or Thassa. And for the final artifact / enchantment removal, we have Crossing Grip. Crossing Grip is 2 and a green for an instant with split second. So that means whenever we cast Crossing Grip, it pretty much gets rid of the stack. Not entirely. This card goes on top of the stack, and nothing else can go on top of it, like no other abilities, no counter spells, no spells like in response, anything like that. Crossing Grip is pretty much the final card in that stack before it actually goes off. Moving into the final removal cards of the sideboard, we have Izzet Static Caster. Izzet Static Caster is 1 blue and red for a human wizard with flash and haste. And we can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature and each other creature with the same name as that creature. So we bring this in against strategies that are super heavy on tokens. We flash this in, ping one of the tokens, and then we can kill all of them effectively if they're 0-1s or 1-1s. Next we have Radiant Flames. Radiant Flames is 2 and a red for a sorcery with Converge. Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast Radiant Flames. So the most we can get off with this is 3, and considering that this is tiny leaders and not many creatures are that big in the first place, 3 mana for a 3 damage Wrath is just fine. And for the last of our cards, they're effectively the same, and they're Song of the Dryads and Imprison in the Moon. So Song of the Dryads is 2 and a green, we enchant permanent, and enchanted permanent is a colorless forest land. While Imprison in the Moon states it's 2 and a blue, and we enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. So we can't enchant lands like we could with Song of the Dryads, or enchantments or artifacts or stuff like that. Imprison in the Moon just takes care of threats essentially. And both of these cards are really good at dealing with like generals who are really good for the deck, kind of like our Animar. If our Animar is hit by a card like Song of the Dryads or Imprison in the Moon, it can pretty much turn our deck off. Not entirely, but it can hit it pretty badly. And that's the same kind of thought process I want to go with these cards. I want to be slapping these on generals that are integral to the deck. And that's the deck tech for today. So let me know what you guys think of this deck. I don't have this deck built anymore. This is something that I used to have because Tiny Leaders used to be super popular where I lived, but now it's not. If it ever comes back, this is the deck that I'm going to be piloting because this deck is awesome. And it's a lot of fun, even though it's not tier 1, you know, just getting off these weird combos and just killing your opponent out of nowhere with storm cards in a format like Tiny Leaders is great and fun in general. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you liked it, you hate it, let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe and all that jazz and blah 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 blah. And yeah, I'll go ahead and catch you all next time.